Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Hey there, welcome to Here's What I Learned. I'm Jackie Hayes, a systems strategist, unapologetic, smutty romantasy lover, Dungeons & Dragons geek, and your no BS guide to building a business that works for you. This is the place where we swap stories, share lessons, and get real about the highs and lows of creating a life and business that actually feels good. No cookie-cutter advice here, just honest conversations about what's working, what's not, and how to rewrite the rules to fit your version of success. So grab your favorite beverage, get comfy, and let's dive in. Today on Here's What I Learned, I have Becky Mollenkamp, she, her. She is an accountability coach for smart, high-achieving business owners. She helps them go after their goals without burning out or losing sight of their values. She's also an intersectional feminist, and she conducts her coaching through that lens. And I was introduced to Becky via Sarah Heater and immediately started following everything that she does, including joining her Feminist podcast collective. So welcome, Becky. I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to chat.
What is something that you have been learning or learning about lately?
I have just purchased a whole bunch of paint marker pens, and I'm digging into my kids' rock collection because I am learning how to paint on rocks as a form of stress relief during what feels like a very stressful time.
Yeah, I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of rocks painted over the next 4 years.
I have a feeling there will be as well, which will benefit my neighborhood because my plan is to anonymously put them out in places as I go on my walks, because I have found those in the past and I've always thought it was so fun. And so I'm going to give it a shot.
I used to live not far from a bike trail, and it was always fun when there was going to be races that went through it because somebody would inevitably go out and use sidewalk chalk and put these positive affirmations all over the place. So when you went for a walk, you were like seeing all this wonderful stuff. It was great. I love it. So I love that you're doing this for your neighborhood.
People were doing that in our neighborhood during the COVID lockdowns, and I loved it. And it is a bit of what inspired me. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I don't claim to be a great artist, but I'm really excited about digging in and learning more how to do it and hopefully do a decent enough job.
Well, it sounds like a lot of fun, if nothing else. So
we'll see.
Yeah. Don't you just love when the thing that you intended to do as a stress reliever becomes its own new stress?
Well, this is why I chose rock painting, because I was like, I'm not going to try to sell them. I don't feel the same need to be excellent at it as I would at other forms of creativity. We'll see if that holds true. But right now, that's how I'm feeling. So let's hope so, because I really don't want it to become stressful. Otherwise, there was no point.
Becky, what does it mean to do business your way to you?
Well, it means, can I cuss?
Oh, 100%.
Good. Because it means doing whatever the fuck I want and not worrying about what anyone else thinks, not having to report to anyone, not having to involve anyone else unless I want to, but really about the freedom that comes with being able to make all my own choices and living with whatever the outcomes are from those choices, but knowing that I can act in a way that's completely values aligned because no one else gets to have a say in what I'm doing. And that was only something I was able to finally do as a self-employed person. And even that, it took me a long time to get to the place, honestly, only in the last few years. And I've been self-employed since 2005. So I'm in my 20th year, going into my 21st year of self-employment. And it really took me only in the last maybe 5 years to get to a place of really doing it my own way, no longer worrying about all of the ways I'm supposed to run a business.
What finally got you there?
It has been a long process of over a decade of dismantling all of the oppression, internalized oppressive stuff that we learn, and unpacking all of that white supremacy and sexism and, ableism and all the stuff that we all internalize because it's given to us. It took me a long time to really unpack it, excavate it. And that is not to say that I've completely finished that work. I will continue the rest of my life as a white, cis, able-bodied person. I will continue to find it. There's just no way I won't, because I'm swimming in it constantly. We all are. But I have excavated enough of it that I finally was able to start to bring that work that I was doing for a long time personally into the business part of my life and say, wait a minute, how is this stuff still showing up in the way I run a business, in my ideas around what's professional, in my ideas around, the best, quote unquote, best ways to market my business, my ideas around like work hard and how work ethic and things like that. So that process has been going on a long time, and it slowly worked towards the business part of my life. And now I'm really at a place where there are still moments where the voices pop up saying, oh, you can't do that. That's wrong to do it that way. But for the most part, I'm able to see it and like recognize it for what it is and allow myself the freedom to say, no, I do get to do it the way that feels right for me.
Yeah. One of the things that I found interesting was the number of people that if they worked in corporate, now they work for themselves, can't let go of like the schedule and all these other things. But you said the word professional, and that was, I think, the moment for me when I went, oh, wow. A client of mine was on a podcast or something, and she said the word and the term professional is attached to white supremacy culture.
Absolutely.
And I sat back and I was thinking about it. I'm like, oh, wow. Because how often do we attach, um, a Black woman's natural hair is unprofessional? And it was like, wow. I'm like, all the ways that we use that word, it really, it's not a good word in reality. So
It is incredibly racist and sexist because who established what is and isn't professional? It was white men, right? Because for the bulk of modern history, right, post in like industrial history, it has been white men in the workplace. Obviously, long before that, women were very much involved in work and in labor, but we were not paid for our labor. We continue to not be paid for a lot of our labor as caretakers and parents, but we were not paid for our labor and contributions, or it wasn't valued the same way. But the move to the office space and that was the biggest piece, is sort of that post-industrial moving to the office space, and white men were the ones who were first just even allowed to work. And then once women were allowed, quote unquote, to come into the workspace, it was still the white men who were determining what was and wasn't acceptable in the workspace. And so, of course, the goal was to make everyone as white and as male as possible, whether you were white or male or not, right? So the idea of a suit, and how long did it take for people to say, like, why do I have to wear a suit? And women wearing suits, and what do their suits need to look like? And women needing to wear hosiery for the longest time. And anyway, and you're right, absolutely, the things that continue today around like, oh, what does a person's hair look like? Who is to say what is professional as far as appearance? And then also behaviors, because it corrects for language, right? There was only certain types of language that are professional, right? There's only certain relationships with time that are professional. So it's like in all parts of the way we show up in work, and trying to question ourselves around those. And to be clear, some of those things you may find work really well for you, right? Some people, being able to get work done looks like having an office, or it looks like having a desk, or it looks like working between set number of hours, right? Because of childcare restraints. Like, there are things that are traditionally quote unquote professional you may continue to adopt because they work for you. But that's the key thing, going to your idea of like, what does it mean to work for you? It's like, it needs to work for you, right? And there are times for me when, including right now, working my desk doesn't work for me. So I'm not working at my desk. Am I less professional? Am I not able to accomplish my work? Am I not able to show up and speak to your questions? No, right? So why should it matter where I'm performing the job, as long as I'm able to do the job and do it well? But those were things that were hard for me to break for a long time. And I think they are for most people. And I think the big thing is most of it goes unexamined for most of us. We just assume that is the way it has to be because it's just what we've always known. And I think the exciting part is when you can finally start to question it all and say, why? Why do I think it has to look this way? What changes if I say, I don't like that, I want to do this instead? Does that really affect my performance? Does it affect the results? Maybe not.
So is that where you would suggest people start from when it comes to examining all of this? Is why is it this way? And does it have to be this way? Is that like where they might want to start?
Those are excellent questions. Those are excellent questions to ask yourself about anything, whether it's professionally or personally. Why is it this way? And a great question I think also related to that one is who benefits from it being this way? And I think that question, because in so many, the more marginalized identities you have, the more often the answer to that question is going to be not me. Not me. I don't benefit from this, right? So then if it's like, why is it this way? Who benefits from it being this way? And if you find out it's not you who benefits from this way, then asking yourself, yeah, what could be different? How could I make it something that works for me? And that's in all things, but also I think it's really important to not just make it about yourself. Um, it's one thing like in your own workspace, yes, but the problem is we carry forward so many of these beliefs in the way we interact with other people that we work with, even if that is your client or a vendor, right? Maybe you don't have staff and employees. If you have staff and employees, you definitely need to be doing this kind of work, right? But even if you don't, you're interacting with other people in your professional sphere, bringing those same beliefs into it. If you aren't asking not just if it doesn't benefit me, how could it, but also to ask who else doesn't it benefit and why, and how could it for them as well. So meaning if the idea of a 9 to 5 workday doesn't benefit you because you have kids who are in school from 7 to 3 or something, then saying, well, it doesn't benefit me. How would it benefit me if it was, so, okay, my workday is going to be 7 to 3. We can't then carry that in and make that an edict for everyone else around us because it may not work for them, right? So to expect that your staff now works 7 to 3 only because it benefits you now has just made you the same perpetuator of these problems, right? Of dictating what's professionalism for other people. The real like excitement comes then when you can say, well, if that doesn't work for me, 7 to 3 works for me. But if I know that my VA, her kids are in college and what actually works for her is to work from, 8 at night until 4 in the morning because she's told me she's a night owl. Can that work? How could we make that work? Right. And to get curious about what's possible. So I think it does start internally and professionally and personally, but then exploring even more beyond that about like, how do I bring these lessons into all the ways I'm interacting with others in my work?
Yeah. I thinking back to when I was still in an office and I was working with somebody who had been, it was a university, and she had been there for like 20 years and she had raised her kids and all of that. And we were starting to talk about prior to COVID, remote working. And her comment was, I didn't get to do it, so nobody else should.
Mhm.
I was like, oh, okay, so that's nice. Wouldn't you have loved to have been able to do that? And now that I'm in this online space, and getting to know more people who are solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, and coming to understand why some people that might be their only option because working in an office can't work because chronic illness or some other means of that has also made me question some of the messages I got growing up about people who were not working, quote unquote, not working. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Do you actually know all their circumstances as to why they're not working and how limited our view of working actually is and how you work actually is?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's so funny because I used to work before I was self-employed. I did work for a while. And boy, am I aging myself because I've now told you I've been self-employed 20 years. So on top of that, I had professional experience before that working in offices, corporate and nonprofit and small business. And the amount of time that I think any of us who's worked in those spaces know is wasted on meetings and on the amount of time it takes in the morning to say hi to everybody in their cubicles before you ever get your stuff started up. And then you go and you got to warm up your coffee and you got to make a breakfast and then like the extended lunch breaks. And so the amount of time anyone actually spends working in an office is minimal. And the truth is the reason they've made it to believe that made you to believe that's professional, right? To be in the office is because they can monitor you, because they can control you, because they get to determine what you're doing and they get to watch every bit of it and they get to get their money's worth by making you be there, even if it actually takes you less time, right? And what we know that ends up looking like in the workspace is people who are running around talking to people because they don't need that much time to finish their work or who are surfing on the web if they can get away with it without getting caught, right? Or are on their phone surfing because they don't want to get caught surfing the computer web, right? Whatever. They're wasting time to appear like they're working. What if we use that, let them have that time back to do other things, right? Or in the days that we live in now, which is like, how can we eke every bit of productivity out of people? They want you in that office so they can see how much time you're not spending, so they can give you more work to accomplish, even if they were perfectly happy saying, if you do X, Y, and Z, we will pay you this amount of money for that. Suddenly, when they learn you can do X, Y, and Z in half the time they thought it might take you or half the time it took someone else to do, now they want you to do A, B, C, and X, Y, and Z. They want to double your workload, but they don't know that if they're not monitoring you, right? So it's all about control. It isn't about productivity or it's not about professionalism. It's not about anything else. It's about control. And that also then results in a lot of ableism and racism and sexism, because if you're not in the workplace, you don't get harassed as much. You don't have to deal with microaggressions as much, right? And those things, while we would think, oh, businesses would like you to not have to deal with that, in truth, it is yet another way to keep you, quote unquote, in your place, right? When you're having to deal with microaggressions, you're having to deal with sexual harassment, the things that we know people with marginalized identities deal with in the workplace all the time, that is a surefire way to keep them small, right? To keep them from advancing. And when they're at home and able to just produce and able to just shine without any preconceived notions of how it's supposed to look because of how they look, or not having to deal with all the other BS they have to deal with on a day-to-day at work, they would actually probably qualify for a lot more promotions, but we can't have that, can we? I've gone on a soapbox, but I have a lot of feelings on this.
Oh, I'm loving it. I love the soapbox. And it reminds me, I was just having this conversation with my partner yesterday or the day before. So his company is telling everybody they have to come back into the office after having said, no, you can live wherever you want to live, as so many of them are doing. And it's his first time back in the office in like 5 years. And instead of having cubicles, they have the open desk situation where you just grab your computer and you find a spot. And as we're talking about, wait a minute, if you don't have a cubicle, you don't get to put up pictures of your kids or anything. And he's like,
what a
yeah,
lovely reminder that you're disposable.
Yeah. You're not an actual person. You're this thing producing something for them, and they don't want
You are
you.
a number.
Yeah. So
Which is so important for all of us to remember, that we are ultimately only numbers to any employer, and even the ones that feel like we are, like you feel like your family, which is actually, there's a lot that can be learned out there about why the like work as family language is really harmful. But even those folks, I mean, ultimately you're always a number. And I get so sad when I see people who have all of this, they wrestle with all of this internal guilt about quitting or even looking for a new job or anything, and they'll suffer in places where they shouldn't, out of some sense of loyalty that I always have to remind them is not being reciprocated and never will be. And that is such a reminder that ultimately inside of capitalism, humans are only seen as cogs in a wheel, and that's it. Right? You are only seen as a number. And unfortunately, we all live in capitalism. So we have to remember that. And that is why, for me, self-employment is the only option. Like, I consider myself to be very unemployable, because I don't think anyone would want somebody who was on this soapbox for the last little while working in their office.
I know I have been talking about, potentially, I have a part-time job, and that's fine because it's actually at a gym that I climb at. So it's really just to pay for my membership. It's no big deal, whatever. And it's very relaxed and very progressive. But if I had to go back into the office, I was telling people, I was like, I would be fired in the first week. There's no doubt. I would say something to offend somebody, in the upper management, and I'd be fired. So
There's no way I wouldn't.
Yeah. No, I've learned, that it works, but not everybody. Like, some people like to be employees or to work for somebody else. It takes a lot to run your own business. But I think, the having to work for a corporation who just doesn't see you as a person whatsoever. I had an ex who was in the boomer generation, and he was always complaining about the millennials and the Gen Zs and their work ethics. And I looked at him and I said, oh, so you mean they don't want to spend 40 hours of their week making money for somebody else at a poor paying job? And it was with the railroad. So it was like breaking their back. I'm not sure which one I'm going to get behind, your work ethic or them being like, no, I'm not doing this for somebody who doesn't even see me as a person.
Right. And continuing to watch the wealth disparity gap grow, not being able to afford a home or even like a place to like call their own, living with their parents. They can't even afford to rent. The average age, I just saw this, that the average age of a renter has gone up to 42. That is so much older than it has ever been. And it is because people can't afford to buy homes anymore. So it is, I hear these things all the time about these age the generational gaps and whatnot, and they don't want to work. And I mean, this is a tale as old as there have been generations. Baby boomers said it about Gen Xers. Well, the greatest generation said about them. They said it about us. We say it about millennials. Millennials are saying about Gen Z. Like, it will continue. But it is also, I think, a good sign of the fact that people are more and more saying this doesn't work, because it doesn't. The system doesn't work.
Yeah. Let's shift gears just a little bit. I know that you have multiple projects that you collaborate with others with. Your podcast, Messy Liberation, and then the Feminist Podcast Collective, Feminist Founders. Let's talk about the podcast collective first. How did that get started, and why did you start it?
Yeah, it's been a little over a year ago, and it was because I wanted it. And so then I couldn't find it, so I created it, which is the story of how most things go for me, because I'm a big fan of community, but I often struggle finding the kind of community I really want, because values, as you can tell, my value set is so important to me, and it really informs everything about how I show up and do work and everything else, that I am somebody who really only wants to be in space with people who have shared values. This does not mean I only want to be in space with people who agree with me on everything. I want to be people who have shared core values of just about what does humanity mean? Because if we can't at least start with that as our solid foundation together, I just don't. I don't have the capacity anymore to be in spaces with people who have that deep of a fundamental disagreement with me. But we can disagree about all kinds of things, like, what's the best dessert? You don't have to agree with me. Like, we can totally disagree there, but not on is a trans woman a woman? I can't disagree with you on that because it's a fundamental belief to me. So finding those kind of spaces with these core values is really hard. I have been surprised at how not value centric a lot of spaces are. Even those that claim to be, they often will use terms more like heart centered or even values led. But then when you actually try to interrogate, what are those values? What does it mean to be heart centered? It becomes a lot less clear and a lot more muddied. And I have found often, to be fair, that those are spaces being run by white women. And I think often it is because they haven't really done a lot of that internal interrogation we talked about earlier themselves. So they can't really define it and bring it into space. So I was like, I just want a space to be with other podcasters who give a shit, who want to who care about things like, are all of my guests white people? Because that's a problem if so, right? Are all of my guests men? That's a problem if so, right? I want to be with people who are thinking about these issues, and I want some support and thinking through those issues with someone else and resolving those issues with someone else, because I do really well in collaborative spaces. Even though I like to be a solopreneur, I can't work for someone else. I love working with others. And that is one thing I do miss about being in a traditional work environment, is having coworkers that you can see what it looks like when you work together, how ideas become better, right? And so how do I create that for myself? Well, I create communities. And so I knew I wanted a podcasting community. What it has become is not what I thought it was necessarily going to be in my head when I first thought of it. It's way better than I ever thought it could be. But my original goal was just basically a little sort of mastermind of other podcasters.
I know that the way you're running the quote unquote meetings, they're not meetings, they're fun gatherings, is this love seat idea. How did that come to mind, and what does that look like, if you could describe that for the listeners?
Yeah. So just quickly, we have 4 calls a month. One is a co-working session. Most people know what those are. We just get together and work on things quietly. One is an education session. So we have an outside speaker, come in and teach us something related to podcasting. And then the other 2 sessions every month are what we call these spotlight sessions, where one podcast is in the love seat, not the hot seat, because that sounds really not fun. So a love seat, who wouldn't want to sit in that? And the entire collective brings all of our thinking power together to help that podcaster with whatever challenge they're facing. It could be something around monetization, like how do I get sponsors? Or how do I, turn these listeners into clients? It could be something around the content. Is this resonating? What could I do better? I'm running out of ideas. It could be a whole host of things. It could be administrative stuff. I need better systems in place, or what tools should I use? And we all get together and help them with that. And then the week following their love seat session, the whole collective works together to promote their podcast. And that is this new structure this year that we're doing. And I think it is, I don't know, you're in it too, so you can say not to brag to myself, but I really love it. I really think it makes so much more. It brings a lot of focus and intention to the calls instead of just kind of showing up and saying, well, what do you want to talk about? Which is what we were doing before. And I was like, that's lovely. And I do love having the community, but I think having something with a little more intention behind it is helpful. And whether you're in the love seat or not, because we're all podcasters, we all walk away with ideas. So they're really useful calls, even if you're not the one who's receiving the attention. And so I love the new structure and format of what we're doing and this like intentionality behind helping each other's shows through promotion, because that is part of the reason to be in a collective too, is the opportunity for exchanging ads, for having someone else run your trailer, for doing guesting swaps. Like there are so many things you can do when you're working collectively beyond just the amazing stuff that we also get with the community of brainstorming and support.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed the love seats. Those are the only ones that I've been able to attend so far, and I've loved them. One of the reasons I love them is so often in quote unquote meetings or gatherings, or there's always the loudest in the room who always get the attention. And then there are folks that, they don't want to interrupt the loudest, or they're just, introverts. And so it takes them a bit longer to come up with their thoughts. The love seat option means that everybody gets a chance to be supported. And I love the way you run them in that the person can talk about what they need help with. And then we're asking clarifying questions before we go straight into like dumping a bunch of ideas on them. Why do you structure it that way?
I just think that that's always very helpful, because I feel like too often we rush to giving the ideas that would come to our head immediately without actually asking the questions to find out, is this the kind of thing that would be helpful to them? Is this actually addressing the real problem they have here? Right? We're just so excited, like chomping at the bit of like, I have the perfect idea because it worked for me, without like finding out, is their situation remotely similar to mine? And so taking that time to ask those clarifying questions, I find to be very helpful, because it gives people time to make sure that the advice they're giving is going to be really suited to that person and not just sort of the first cool idea that comes to their head. I also think it's nice to check in with the person to make sure that they're wanting advice, or, how they want to receive that advice or what they're looking for, because it's easy for us to also then start like throwing so many things that we're setting them off track. And so trying to kind of check in with people. I'm a coach. And so that is kind of part of the work I do. Is I'm a question asker by nature because of that. I mean, I used to be a journalist. It was all about asking questions. I coach now. It's all about asking questions. And I have seen through coaching the power that comes just through asking questions, because even that portion of it gets people often thinking about things that they hadn't thought to ask or hadn't thought to think about yet, right? Even before they're getting to the advice, they're thinking, oh, I hadn't thought about that part. I guess I need to know that before I can figure out what I'm doing here, right? So I find that the questions can actually be as powerful as the advice, or sometimes more powerful.
Yeah, I have discovered that even in the work that I do when it comes to systems and helping people create systems that work for them, because I just sit there and ask questions. Like literally, that's all I'm doing, because they actually know it's in their brain. I'm just helping them organize it and find it and dig it out. So I'm just asking people, they can usually figure it out for themselves, honestly.
Yeah.
Becky, it's been 20 years that you've been in business for yourself. So Becky now, what would you tell? Well, let's start with Becky 10 years ago and then Becky 20 years ago. What kind of advice would you give those two Beckys?
Well, 10 years ago, Becky was preparing to have a family. And that has like, it's an interesting demarcation really in my journey, because my son's about to turn 9. So it's really right around that 10-year ago mark where my business had to shift dramatically. So prior to 10 years ago, I worked when I wanted. Sometimes that was 2 a.m. in my pajamas on the couch, whatever. Like it was way more leisurely. And there were things about that I really liked. But having a kid has actually helped me with creating more structure that actually makes me more productive. So, the person from, I'm actually going to go 20 years ago because I've learned so much. So 20 years ago, Becky, I would say like, just because you can work in your pajamas and just because you can work from the couch doesn't necessarily mean that's the best thing to do for you. And it felt like freedom. And so it's not like I regret it, but I know I could have been more productive had I put more structure. This from the person who's like bucking professionalism. But again, figuring out what actually worked for me. I think I swung the pendulum so far the other direction because I was so rejecting everything that I had experienced in corporate America. And I think I went a little too far in that other direction of being a little too haphazard with my work, which meant things would fall through the cracks, or I would miss deadlines, or, I wasn't being as proactive as I could have been in finding new clients. I was relying way too much on like one client. So things like that were really just this like me not knowing what I was doing going and just being like, I just kind of want to lay in my pajamas and watch TV and kind of work. I still did okay, but when I think about how much more my business could have been, how much more quickly it could have been more successful had I taken it a little more seriously. But again, I don't live in regret, so it's fine. But that is what I would have told myself 10 years ago, Becky, who was about to have kids. I would have probably said like, it might be smart to save a little more before you have a kid. Can't change it now and it's all okay, but that would have been helpful. It might have been smart to like prepare for the fact that your child could come early, because he did 5 weeks and I wasn't ready. So I was working in the hospital the day after giving birth, like not ideal because I didn't build in enough time. I was like, I'll take time after he's here. Didn't think about the fact that he could come early and I wouldn't be ready. And what else? I think the thing that I most wish I had realized earlier in all of it is just how much showing up truly as yourself, the more that you can allow yourself to be 100% true to who you are, free from all of the other shit and not be afraid of what people think, actually, the more it resonates. I spent a lot of time worrying about alienating people. I was, worried about like all of this attraction marketing and wanting to attract all these right people and everything. But in my mind, that meant attracting everyone because I thought, I had to have some giant business, but I don't. And what I actually, I practice now repel marketing. I want to repel the wrong people. And so for me, that looks like showing up really loud and proud about what I believe in and who I am. And if it turns people off, good. Instead of it being like, oh God, I don't want to turn anyone off. I'm like, how can I make sure I'm getting rid of those people? Because they're not going to buy from me. They weren't the right people and I won't enjoy working with them. And so I wish I could have come to that earlier because man, the freedom that I've had in the last few years since really going there and recognizing how it also translates into success. I was so afraid of it and it was the best thing I've done.
What is something you would like to leave the listeners with?
Good question. I mean, I feel like I don't want to be a broken record, so I don't want to just harp on it, but I really just want to leave people with like that permission slip that we often need to say it is okay if your business doesn't look like every other business. It is okay if your dreams and ambition aren't the same as what they tell you they're supposed to be. You don't have to want to be a billionaire or even a millionaire. And you can live a really good life making a lot less than $1 million. And so figuring out what's right for you, like free from all that noise. If you can sit down and really get quiet and honest with yourself about what do you really want your life to look like and what do you really need from your business to make that happen? Or even if you're not self-employed and traditionally employed, like what do you actually need to earn and what are you willing to put up with to do it? But like, I think that just figuring that out for yourself, getting really honest about what you actually want your life to look like, I think that just goes the longest way. And most of us don't do it. Even if we think we do, often that vision that we've created is still something we were told we should want, right? And so we have to really get truly honest with ourselves about like, do I really want this? Or going back to those questions, like, who said it has to be this way? Who does it benefit for me to want these things, right? Like, does it benefit me to want to have a shiny Bentley or does it benefit Bentley for me to have that shiny Bentley, right? And the answer could be both and that's okay, but to really be honest about that.
Yeah. And I think too, you can have your vision today, but it's important to check back on a regular basis to make sure that that's
Oh
still
yeah,
the vision that you have. So,
yeah, mine changes all the time for
yeah.
sure.
Becky, where can the listeners find you?
Well, you can go to beckymollenkamp.com and there I have everything that I'm doing because like you mentioned, I have a lot of things that I do. So there I have a program called Feminist Founders that I do with Faith Clark, and we have a newsletter and a membership inside of that space for people who are trying to challenge business norms. I have the podcast collective of which you're a member. You can find that link on my website as well, where people who are running podcasts and want that community can come be a part of that. I also do a debt paydown course with my friend Meg Wheeler, who's a CPA, and it's sort of the mindset and practical parts of getting yourself out of debt. I have a lot of projects in the fire at all times and in podcasts. So just go to beckymollenkamp.com and you can learn about all of them.
Because there's a lot of places.
Yeah. And the good news with an unusual name like mine, if you just search Becky Mollenkamp, you'll find me, even if you misspell it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Jackie. This was great.
Thanks for hanging out with me on Here's What I Learned. If today's episode gave you an aha moment, a laugh, or something to think about, make sure you're subscribed to my email list. That's where I share even more tips, stories, and behind-the-scenes insights to help you simplify and thrive. And remember, you get to do business and life your way. Until next time, keep experimenting, keep simplifying, and keep learning.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.